Chapter 1. The Empty Ranch. The autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the wooden walls of Samuel Porter's cabin, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. At 53, Samuel's weathered face bore the marks of years spent under the harsh western sun and the deeper lines of a man who had known profound loss. His ranch, once bustling with life, now stood quiet save for the occasional lowing of cattle and the creaking of the windmill that needed fixing, one of many tasks that seemed less urgent with each passing year. 15 miles outside of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1879, Samuel's homestead sat nestled against the foothills where the desert began its slow climb toward distant mountains. He had built this place with Hannah, his wife, back when their dreams were as vast as the western sky, before the fever took her and their 2 boys in the winter of 73. Samuel poured himself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, watching the steam rise and the gray morning light filtering through the small window. The coffee pot was too big for just one man, but he'd never bothered to replace it. Small habits of a shared life were all he had left. Another day, he muttered to no one, a ritual that had replaced proper prayer years ago. He had just stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, when he spotted movement on the horizon, a wagon, moving slowly along the dirt road that led to his property. Samuel narrowed his eyes. The stagecoach wasn't due for another 3 days, and he wasn't expecting supplies from town. Visitors were rare enough to warrant suspicion in these parts. Setting his cup on the porch railing, he went inside and emerged with his Winchester rifle, not held ready to fire, but present enough to send a message to whoever was approaching. Out here, caution wasn't paranoia, it was survival. As the wagon drew closer, Samuel could make out a man driving, hunched over the reins, and what looked like several small figures huddled in the back, covered with a tattered canvas. The horses pulling the wagon looked nearly spent, their heads hanging low despite the relatively flat terrain. "That's far enough," Samuel called when the wagon was within earshot. "State your business." The driver, a thin man with a pockmarked face and clothes that had seen better days, pulled the wagon to a stop. "Name's Harlan Wilkes, sir. Coming from Kansas way." His voice had the hoarse quality of someone who'd been on the trail too long. "I've got 6 orphan girls bound for the mission school in Tucson." Samuel didn't lower his rifle. "Tucson's another 3 days, ride southwest. You've strayed from the main trail." Wilkes nodded, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool morning. "Had trouble with bandits 2 days back. Lost 1 horse. Had to take the lesser-known paths. We're low on water, and these girls need rest. Spotted your place from the ridge yonder." At the mention of the girls, Samuel's eyes moved to the back of the wagon where the canvas had shifted, revealing several pairs of eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Young eyes. The oldest couldn't have been more than 13 or 14. "Mission school, you say?" Samuel kept his voice even. He'd heard stories of men transporting children west under false pretenses. The frontier had laws, but they were stretched thin across too much territory. "Yes, sir. Sisters of Mercy. I've got papers." Wilkes reached slowly into his coat, pulling out folded documents. "I transport for them regular-like. These girls lost their families to the fever that swept through Hays County. Church folk asked me to bring them west for a fresh start. Fever." The word stirred something in Samuel's chest, a dull ache he'd learned to live with but never truly escaped. "Throw those papers over." Slowly, Samuel instructed, watching as the man complied. Samuel picked up the documents, keeping one eye on the wagon as he unfolded them. They appeared legitimate, transit papers for orphan minors, signed by a county judge and bearing the seal of the Sisters of Mercy Mission. Names and ages of 6 girls were listed. Mary, 14, Elizabeth, 12, Catherine, 11, twins Sarah and Rebecca, 9, and little Anna, 6. "The girls need water and rest," Wilkes repeated. "Been 3 days since we had proper shelter." "Just 1 night, sir. We'll be on our way come morning." Samuel hesitated, looking again at the wagon. The canvas had shifted further, and he could now see the girls more clearly. Their dresses were tattered, their faces smudged with dirt, and their eyes held that vacant look he'd seen before, in Soldiers After Battle, in settlers who'd lost everything to raids or disaster. It was the look of people who had witnessed too much. "There's a well behind the house," Samuel finally said, lowering his rifle. "Water your horses and fill your canteens. The girls can rest in the barn. It's clean enough, and there's fresh hay." "Much obliged, sir," Wilkes said, gathering the reins. "I didn't say you could stay in the house," Samuel added firmly. "And I'll be keeping an eye out. We understand each other." Wilkes nodded, a hint of relief crossing his features. "Perfectly, sir." As the wagon creaked past him toward the well, Samuel caught the eye of the oldest girl, Mary according to the papers. Unlike the vacant stares of the younger ones, hers held something else, a wariness, yes, but also a flicker of defiance. She didn't look away as many children would when confronted with a stranger's gaze. Instead, she held his, as if measuring him just as carefully as he was assessing their situation. Samuel looked away first, an uncomfortable feeling settling in his stomach. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't place what. The papers seemed in order, and Wilkes, though rough around the edges, behaved like many of the transport men who made their living moving people and goods across the vast Western territories. As he turned to go back inside, Samuel caught a glimpse of the youngest girl, little Anna, her blonde hair matted and dirty, clutching what appeared to be a rag doll missing one arm. For a moment, his mind superimposed another image, his son Joseph at that age, holding the wooden horse Samuel had carved for him. The ghost of memory passed quickly, but it left him unsettled in a way he hadn't felt in years. Just one night, he reminded himself as he stepped back into his cabin. Then they'll be gone. But as he moved through his daily chores, checking the cattle in the north pasture and mending a section of fence that had come loose in the last storm, Samuel found his eyes drifting back to the barn where the girls had settled. Once he caught sight of Mary drawing water from the well, her movements efficient despite her obvious exhaustion. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, stood nearby, holding hands as if afraid they might lose each other if they let go. By late afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the landscape in hues of orange and gold, Samuel had made a decision that surprised even himself. He slaughtered one of his chickens and set about making a stew, more food than he'd prepared in years. Just being practical, he told himself as he added potatoes and a few carrots from his small garden. Can't have him going hungry and weak. Might bring trouble. But even as he stirred the pot, Samuel knew he was lying to himself. There was something about those girls, something that had stirred the embers of feelings he thought had died along with his family. Not compassion exactly. He'd seen too much suffering in his years on the frontier to be moved easily by it, but perhaps recognition, a mirror of his own loss reflected in their eyes. As the stew simmered, Samuel Porter stood at his cabin window, watching the last light fade from the sky, wondering what ghost might have followed those 6 ragged girls to his doorstep, and why. After all these years of carefully maintained solitude, he found himself setting out bowls for a meal he intended to share. The sound of the cabin door slamming shut startled a pair of ravens from their perch on the corral fence. Samuel balanced the pot of stew against his hip, a stack of wooden bowls tucked under his arm, as he made his way toward the barn. The evening air had cooled considerably, carrying the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain from the mountains. Inside the barn, Wilkes had arranged a makeshift camp for the girls. Blankets were spread over fresh hay, creating small nests that reminded Samuel of how birds prepare for winter, practicality over comfort. The girls themselves sat huddled together, the younger ones leaning against the older as if drawing warmth and courage from their proximity. "Brought food," Samuel announced, his voice gruff from disuse. He wasn't accustomed to speaking more than a few words a day, mostly to his livestock or to himself. Wilkes looked up from where he was tending a small lamp. "That's mighty kind, Mr. Porter. Isn't it, girls?" The girls straightened at the sight of the steaming pot, hunger momentarily overriding their caution. Only Mary, the oldest, remained guarded, her eyes moving from the food to Samuel and back again, as if assessing the cost of this unexpected generosity. "It's just stew," Samuel said, setting the pot down on an upturned crate. "Nothing fancy." He distributed the bowls, watching as each girl received her portion with solemn thanks that seemed rehearsed. When he reached Mary, she accepted the bowl without lowering her gaze. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice stronger than he expected. There was a slight accent to her words, not quite southern, something else he couldn't place. "You're welcome," he replied, finding himself oddly uncomfortable under her steady gaze. It held an awareness beyond her years, the kind that comes only from weathering life's harshest storms. Little Anna, the youngest, sat cross-legged beside Mary, her spoon clutched in a grip so tight her knuckles showed white. Her first taste of the stew brought a transformation to her face, a flicker of pleasure so profound it seemed to momentarily erase the weariness etched there. "It's good," she whispered, the first words Samuel had heard from her. "Eat slowly," Mary instructed the younger girls, particularly the twins who were gulping down their portions. "Remember what happened last time?" Samuel raised an eyebrow at this, but said nothing. He'd seen it before. Children who'd known hunger eating too quickly when food became available, making themselves sick in the process. Wilkes accepted his bowl with a nod of thanks. "Been living on hardtack and jerky for days. This here's a feast." Samuel grunted in acknowledgement, taking a seat on a bale of hay near the barn door. He ate mechanically, more interested in observing the dynamics unfolding before him than in the food itself. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, were mirror images of each other with dark hair and serious eyes that occasionally darted toward the barn door, as if expecting trouble to walk through at any moment. Catherine, at 11, had a nurturing way about her, helping little Anna wipe stew from her chin and encouraging Elizabeth, the quietest of the group, to eat more. Elizabeth, with her mouse-brown hair and downcast eyes, worried Samuel the most. She hadn't spoken a word since their arrival, and she ate with mechanical precision, never looking up from her bowl. There was something in her demeanor that suggested a deeper trauma than the others, or perhaps just a different way of carrying it. "Where exactly in Kansas did you say you came from?" Samuel asked, directing his question to Wilkes. "Hays County," the man replied between mouthfuls. "Little settlement called Fairview. Never heard of it. Wouldn't expect you to. Ain't much more than a few farms and a general store. Or wasn't before the fever." Mary's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, a subtle reaction that Samuel noted before she resumed eating, her face carefully blank. "What kind of fever takes so many so quickly?" Samuel pressed, the question emerging from his own painful memories. Wilkes shrugged. "Doctors called it typhoid. Swept through after the spring floods contaminated the wells. These girls were the only survivors from their community." Samuel nodded slowly. The story was plausible enough. Disease was a constant threat in frontier settlements, especially those without proper sanitation or access to medical care. Still, something about Wilkes's easy delivery of this tragic tale felt rehearsed, like lines from a traveling show. "And you just happened to be passing through?" Convenient timing. A flash of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed Wilkes's face before he smoothed it away with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I trade through that region regular-like. The reverend at the county seat knew I was heading west. Asked if I'd transport these poor souls to the sisters in Tucson. For a fee, I imagine. A man's got to make a living, Mr. Porter," Wilkes said, his tone hardening slightly. "Even doing the Lord's work." The conversation lapsed into silence after that, broken only by the scrape of spoons against wooden bowls and the occasional soft murmur between the girls. When they finished eating, Samuel collected the bowls, noting how each child had cleaned her portion completely, running fingers around the edges to capture every last bit of sustenance. "There's water in the trough outside for washing," he told them, "and the outhouse is behind the chicken coop. Don't wander beyond the corral after dark. Coyotes get bold this time of year." As the girls filed out to wash up before settling for the night, Samuel caught Mary by the elbow, gently enough that she could pull away if she chose. She tensed but remained in place, her eyes meeting his with that same measured assessment. "You look after the others," he said, not a question, but an observation. "Someone has to," she replied simply. "How long has it been?" "Since the fever." Mary's expression flickered, a brief crack in her composure that revealed uncertainty beneath. 2 months, maybe 3. Days blurred together on the trail. Samuel nodded, releasing her arm. If you or the others need anything in the night, the cabin's not locked. She studied him for a moment longer, as if trying to decode some hidden message in his words. Why are you helping us, Mr. Porter? The question caught him off guard with its directness. Wouldn't turn children away. Not out here. Some would. She countered, her voice low enough that Wilkes, who was spreading his bedroll near the barn door, couldn't hear. Some have. Before Samuel could respond, little Anna returned from washing up, her face cleaner but still bearing streaks where dirt had become too ingrained to remove with just water. She slipped her small hand into Mary's, leaning against the older girl's side with the heavy weariness of a child fighting sleep. Come on, Anna, Mary said, her voice softening as she addressed the child. Time for bed. Samuel watched them go, a strange hollow feeling expanding in his chest. He'd maintained his solitude for so long that the presence of others, especially children, felt like an intrusion not just on his property, but on the carefully constructed emptiness of his life. Yet there was something else too, a forgotten sensation stirring beneath the surface like groundwater after a long drought. Later, as he sat on his cabin porch watching the moon rise over the eastern hills, Samuel found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the barn. A single lamp still burned inside, its light visible through the cracks in the weathered wood, a small beacon in the vast darkness of the desert night. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Wilkes emerged from the shadows, a rolled cigarette between his fingers. Girls are settled, he reported, striking a match against the porch post. The brief flare illuminated his face, the deep-set eyes and hollow cheeks giving him a skull-like appearance. We'll be out of your hair at first light. Samuel nodded, saying nothing. Wilkes took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the darkness. Don't see many solo operations out this way anymore. Most folks band together these days. Safety in numbers. I manage. Must get lonely. Samuel didn't respond to this, his silence a wall he'd grown accustomed to placing between himself and unwanted conversation. After a moment, Wilkes shrugged. Suit yourself. Just making conversation. You said you had trouble with bandits, Samuel said, changing the subject. Anyone I should be watching for? 3 men, riding north last I saw. Doubt they'd circle back this way. Wilkes flicked ash onto the ground. They were after money, which I don't carry much of. Got discouraged quick when they realized all I had was a wagon full of orphans. There was something callous in his phrasing that set Samuel's teeth on edge. Those girls have been through enough without being treated like cargo. Wilkes raised his eyebrows, surprised by the sudden edge in Samuel's tone. Didn't mean nothing by it. Just stating facts. I'm delivering them to a better life than they had. That's what matters. And what kind of life is waiting for them in Tucson? Education, religion, proper raising by the sisters until they're old enough to marry or find respectable work. Wilkes shrugged again. Better than starving or worse back east. Samuel had heard enough stories about orphan trains and mission schools to know that the reality often fell short of these promises. Some children found good homes and opportunities, but others faced years of hard labor disguised as education, or were placed with families who saw them as nothing more than cheap help. The oldest girl, Mary, Samuel said, keeping his voice casual. She doesn't sound like she's from Kansas. Wilkes took another long drag before answering. Her folks were immigrants. German or Dutch, something like that. Came through New York before settling west. The explanation was plausible, but delivered too quickly, too smoothly. Samuel had spent enough years reading men across poker tables and cattle deals to recognize when someone was spinning a story. Get some rest, he said finally, rising from his chair. Long ride to Tucson tomorrow. Wilkes nodded, dropping his cigarette and grinding it under his boot. Appreciate the hospitality, Mr. Porter. Rare thing these days. After Wilkes returned to the barn, Samuel remained on the porch for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through sage, the the occasional soft whicker from the corral where the horses rested. Normal sounds that had been the backdrop of his existence for years. Yet tonight they seemed insufficient to fill the vastness of his thoughts. Something wasn't right about Wilkes and his story. The inconsistencies were small, but they nagged at Samuel like burrs caught in a horse's mane. Irritants that couldn't be ignored once noticed. The girl's reaction to the man was telling too. Respectful on the surface, but with an undercurrent of tension, particularly from Mary. Eventually, Samuel went inside his cabin, but didn't immediately prepare for bed. Instead, he took down the small tin box he kept on the high shelf above the stove. Inside were the few documents that constituted the official record of his life. Land deed, marriage certificate, birth records for his sons, and finally, the death certificates that had closed the chapter on his family. He ran a weathered finger over Hannah's name, remembering how she had looked the last time he saw her alive. Her face flushed with fever, eyes bright with delirium as she called for their sons who had already passed days before. The county doctor had called it influenza, but what did names matter when the result was the same? Samuel replaced the papers and returned the box to its shelf. Then, with deliberate movements, he checked his Winchester and placed it near his bed before lying down, fully clothed except for his boots. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams he hadn't experienced in years. Hannah calling his name, not in delirium, but in warning, her voice carrying the urgency of approaching danger. He woke several times, listening intently to the night sounds, but heard nothing out of the ordinary. It was well past midnight, during one such period of wakefulness, that Samuel heard the soft creak of the cabin door opening. He reached for his rifle, movement slow and controlled to avoid making noise, and waited. Moonlight spilled through the cabin's small window, casting long shadows across the plank floor. A small figure stood in the doorway, hesitating on the threshold. "Mr. Porter?" The whisper was so faint he almost missed it. Samuel sat up, keeping the rifle across his lap, but not raising it. "Who's there?" The figure stepped into the shaft of moonlight, revealing Mary's face, her expression taut with tension. "I need to talk to you. About Mr. Wilkes." Samuel lowered his rifle, setting it aside, but keeping it within reach. He lit the small oil lamp beside his bed, adjusting the flame to a soft glow that illuminated Mary's face without brightening the cabin enough to be visible from outside. In the gentle light, she looked both older and younger than her 14 years, her features sharp with responsibility, yet holding the vulnerability of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "He's asleep," Mary said, answering Samuel's unasked question about Wilkes. "The whiskey in your barn saw to that." Samuel frowned. He kept a small supply of whiskey hidden behind some loose boards. Emergency medicine, he told himself, though it had been years since he'd touched it. "Resourceful of you to find it," he said, his tone neutral. "I watch. I listen. It's how we've survived this long." She glanced over her shoulder at the open door, then back to Samuel. "The others are waiting in the shadow of the corral. If I don't return in 10 minutes, they'll run." "Run where?" "There's nothing but open country for miles. Anywhere is better than where he's taking us." Samuel studied her face, noting the determination set in her jaw despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Tell me." Mary took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "There is no mission school in Tucson. At least, not one waiting for us. Wilkes works for a man named Blackwood who owns gambling houses and other establishments in mining towns across the territory." Samuel's expression darkened. He'd heard of such operations, frontier brothels disguised as hotels or dance halls, where desperate women and sometimes children were exploited by men looking for entertainment in the harsh reality of mining life. "Those papers he showed you are forgeries," Mary continued. "Good ones, but fake all the same. He's taken other girls before us. We heard him talking to his partner before." She faltered, composing herself before continuing. "Before we escaped the first time, you tried to run before?" She nodded. 3 days ago. That's when we lost the second wagon and one of the men. There were no bandits, just us creating a distraction while Elizabeth set fire to their supplies. We almost got away, but Wilkes caught up to us near the creek crossing. The story was beginning to make more sense now. The girl's wariness, their haunted eyes, the inconsistencies in Wilkes's tale. But Samuel needed to be certain. "Where are you really from, Mary?" "St. Louis, originally. My father worked the steamboats. After he died, my mother took in washing to support us, but when she got sick..." Mary's voice tightened. The city orphanage was full. A woman came, said she represented a charity that placed orphans with good families out west. There were papers, everything looked proper. And the others? Catherine and Elizabeth came from the same orphanage in St. Louis. The twins were from a poor farm in Missouri. Their parents died in a fire. Anna. Mary's expression softened. Anna's mother worked for Blackwood. She died trying to help us escape during the first transport west. Anna doesn't speak much since then. Samuel rubbed a hand across his face, processing the information. It fit together too neatly, explained too many of his misgivings to be a fabrication. "Why tell me this? Why not just run while he's sleeping?" "Because we need help," Mary said simply. "Anna can't travel far or fast. The twins are strong, but they're only 9. We have no money, no supplies. And Wilkes has friends in the territory who would be looking for us. You're asking me to take on a man like Blackwood? I'm just one rancher, girl. I'm asking you to help us get to Redemption Creek, to the law there. Or if not that, just give us supplies and a day's head start." Her voice dropped lower. "You have kind eyes, Mr. Porter. Behind all that gruffness, you wouldn't have fed us otherwise." Samuel stood, moving to the window to peer out at the moonlit yard. From here, he could just make out the small, huddled shapes of the other girls in the shadow of the corral fence, waiting with the patient stillness of prey animals hiding from a predator. "What makes you think the law in Redemption Creek would help?" he asked without turning around. "Frontier marshals have plenty to deal with without taking on child welfare cases." "The marshal, there is a woman," Mary said, surprising him. "Marshal Kate Sullivan. We heard Wilkes and his partner talking about avoiding her jurisdiction. Said she hanged 2 men last spring for trafficking Chinese girls to the mining camps." Samuel had heard rumors of a female marshal operating somewhere in the territory, but he dismissed them as frontier tall tales. Such an appointment would be unusual, but not impossible in these changing times. Even if that's true, Redemption Creek is a hard day's ride from here. "Please, Mr. Porter." Mary's composure cracked slightly, revealing the desperate child beneath the forced maturity. "We have nowhere else to turn." Samuel was silent for a long moment, weighing options and consequences. He had built his solitary existence carefully, deliberately removing himself from the complications of human connection after losing his family. Taking a stand now would shatter that carefully maintained isolation, potentially bringing danger to his doorstep. Yet as he looked at Mary, he saw not just a child in need, but a reflection of something he had lost. Not only his family, but the man he had once been. A man who believed in doing what was right, regardless of the cost. "Wake the others," he said finally. "Quietly. Bring them to the root cellar behind the cabin. The entrance is covered with an old wagon wheel and brush, but you'll find it. Wait there until I come for you." Relief flooded Mary's features, quickly replaced by cautious determination. "What about Wilkes?" "I'll handle Wilkes. Go now, quickly." After Mary slipped out into the night, Samuel moved with practiced efficiency. He dressed fully, strapping on the gun belt he rarely wore anymore. From beneath a loose floorboard under his bed, he retrieved a small canvas bag containing emergency funds, gold coins, and paper currency he'd saved from cattle sales over the years. Next, he filled a saddlebag with essentials: jerky, hardtack, a canteen of water, matches, and a small medical kit. He worked methodically, his mind clear with purpose for the first time in years. The Winchester came last, loaded and ready. Samuel had no illusions about Wilkes surrendering peacefully if confronted. Men in his line of work didn't survive by being reasonable when cornered. He was just closing the saddlebag when a floorboard creaked behind him. Samuel whirled, rifle raised, to find Wilkes standing in the doorway, a revolver aimed steadily at Samuel's chest. "Bit late for travel preparations, ain't it, Porter?" Wilkes's voice was clear, showing none of the slurring Samuel would expect if he'd truly been incapacitated by whiskey as Mary had believed. "Just getting an early start on some trading in town," Samuel replied evenly, his mind racing to calculate if the girls had reached the root cellar yet. Wilkes smiled, a cold expression that never touched his eyes. "Funny coincidence. My merchandise seems to have wandered off at the same time you're packing to leave. Almost like the two might be connected." "Don't know what you're talking about." Samuel kept his rifle leveled, the standoff balanced on a knife's edge of tension. "I think you do." Wilkes took a step into the cabin, his revolver unwavering. "The oldest one came to you, didn't she? Filled your head with lies about where we're headed. 6 orphan girls bound for a mission school that doesn't exist. That about cover it." Wilkes's smile tightened. "Business is business, Porter. There's a demand for young women in the territories. I'm just the supplier. They're children. They're investments. Considerable ones at that. Blackwood paid good money for their transport, and I aim to deliver." Wilkes took another step forward. "Now, where are they?" Samuel knew he should be afraid, facing a man like Wilkes with violence clearly on his mind. Instead, he felt oddly calm, centered in a way he hadn't experienced since before the fever took his family. "Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you," Samuel said, his voice steady. "Best you ride out now, while you still can." Wilkes's expression hardened. "You threatening me, old man? I've killed better men than you for less." "Not threatening, just stating facts. You won't find those girls, and you won't leave here with them if you do." The standoff stretched between them, neither man willing to lower his weapon or back down. Through the window, Samuel could see the eastern sky beginning to lighten, the first hint of dawn approaching. Time was running short if he hoped to get the girls to safety before full daylight made travel more visible. "I don't want to kill you, Porter," Wilkes said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "But I will if you don't tell me where those girls are hiding. Blackwood doesn't accept failure, and I don't accept losses." "Then we're at an impasse." Wilkes's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance. Where are they?" The tension in the cabin was broken by a sound neither man expected. The crack of a rifle shot from outside, followed by the distinctive ping of a bullet striking metal. Both men instinctively ducked, but Wilkes recovered first, lunging towards Samuel with his revolver extended. Samuel fired the Winchester, the roar deafening in the confined space of the cabin. Wilkes staggered but didn't fall, returning fire as he crashed into Samuel, sending both men to the floor. Pain blossomed in Samuel's side as Wilkes's bullet found its mark, but adrenaline kept him moving, struggling to keep the larger man from pinning him down. They grappled on the rough plank floor, each trying to gain control of their weapons. Wilkes landed a heavy blow to Samuel's wounded side, drawing a gasp of pain, but Samuel countered with the butt of his rifle to Wilkes's jaw, a solid hit that momentarily stunned the younger man. Using the brief advantage, Samuel rolled away, coming up to one knee with the Winchester aimed at Wilkes's chest. "Don't move," he warned, breathing heavily from exertion and pain. Wilkes, blood streaming from his split lip, froze with his hand inches from his fallen revolver. His eyes, cold with calculation, assessed Samuel and the rifle pointed at him. "You won't shoot an unarmed man," Wilkes said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Not in cold blood. You'd be surprised what a man will do to protect innocent lives," Samuel replied, his fingers steady on the trigger. "Now, kick that revolver toward me." A new voice spoke from the doorway. "Do as he says, mister, or the next shot won't hit your canteen." Mary stood there, Samuel's old Sharps rifle, a relic from his cavalry days that he kept mounted above the fireplace, held with surprising steadiness in her young hands. Wilkes's expression contorted with rage. "You little—" "Careful," Samuel interrupted. "The girl's already shown she can shoot." "That was her outside, wasn't it, Mary?" Mary nodded, not taking her eyes off Wilkes. "Aim for his horse's water supply, like you taught us with rabbits, Mr. Porter. Scare, don't kill, unless you have to." It was a lie. Samuel had taught her nothing, but a convincing one that made Wilkes reassess the situation, looking between the two of them with growing uncertainty. "Kick the gun over," Samuel repeated. This time, Wilkes complied, sending the revolver skidding across the floor toward Samuel. With practiced ease, Samuel scooped it up without lowering the Winchester. On your feet, he ordered. Slowly. As Wilkes stood, Samuel became acutely aware of the warm wetness spreading across his shirt from the bullet wound in his side. The initial surge of adrenaline was fading, bringing with it waves of pain that threatened his concentration. He needed to secure Wilkes quickly before blood loss weakened him further. Mary, there's rope hanging by the door. Grab it. The girl complied, keeping the sharps trained on Wilkes as she retrieved the coil of rope with one hand. Her face was pale but determined, showing none of the terror one might expect from a child in such a situation. Hands behind your back, Samuel instructed Wilkes, who hesitated, clearly calculating his chances of overpowering the wounded man and the girl. Don't, Samuel warned, reading his intentions. Even if you get past me, she'll put a hole in you big enough to see daylight through. Wilkes slowly placed his hands behind his back, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. Blackwood will find you, he said as Mary began binding his wrists with a rope. Might take a week, might take a month, but he'll come. And when he does, he'll kill you slow. He'll have to find me first, Samuel replied, though he knew the threat wasn't empty. Men like Blackwood didn't build criminal empires in the territories by letting slights go unpunished. Mary finished binding Wilkes's hands, pulling the knots tight enough to make him wince. For a girl her age, she had a remarkable knowledge of practical skills, another testament to the harsh education life had already provided her. Check if it's secure, Samuel instructed, fighting to keep his voice steady as pain pulsed through his side. Mary tugged at the bindings, then nodded. It'll hold. Good. Now tie his ankles. As Mary worked, Samuel pressed his free hand against his wound, feeling warm blood seep between his fingers. The bullet had entered his left side below the ribs. No exit wound that he could feel, which meant the lead was still inside him. A complication he didn't need with dawn approaching and 6 girls depending on him for escape. Where are the others? He asked Mary. In the root cellar, like you said. Elizabeth is watching them. Mary finished securing Wilkes's ankles, then looked up at Samuel, her eyes widening as she noticed the blood staining his shirt. You're hurt. It's nothing, Samuel lied, motioning her back with a slight nod. Just a graze. Wilkes laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Liar. I could see you bleeding out from here, old man. You'll never make it to Redemption Creek. Samuel ignored him, focusing on Mary. There's a trapdoor in the floor of the storage shed. Under it, you'll find supplies, food, ammunition, some clothes that might fit the older girls. Gather what you can carry. Mary hesitated, clearly torn between following his instructions and concern for his wound. But, go, Samuel said firmly. We don't have much time. After she left, Samuel kept the Winchester trained on Wilkes while retrieving a kitchen chair. He positioned it carefully before sitting down, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his side. You're a dead man, Wilkes said, watching him with cold calculation. Even if that bullet doesn't kill you, Blackwood will. All this for 6 orphan brats who don't mean anything to you. Samuel tore a strip from a nearby dish towel, pressing it against his wound in a makeshift bandage. They mean enough. Remind you of your own kids? Is that it? When Samuel's expression flickered, Wilkes smiled. Yeah, I noticed the small clothes in that trunk when I was looking for your whiskey. Boys' clothes, folded all neat like someone was coming back for them someday. Shut up. Hit nerve, did I? They die, Porter. Your wife and kiddies. Wilkes leaned forward despite his bonds, voice dropping to a taunting whisper. Was it the fever? Same fever that supposedly took these girls' families? Funny coincidence that. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger of the Winchester, temptation rising to end Wilkes's taunts permanently. It would be easy, justifiable, even given the man's crimes and threats. No one would question a dead body with a gun nearby, especially once they learned what he had planned for the girls. But something held him back. Not mercy for Wilkes, but the knowledge that such an act would mark him in ways he wasn't prepared to face. He had killed before, during the war, and once in self-defense against a cattle rustler, but never a bound man, regardless of how deserving. You talk too much, Samuel said finally, lowering the rifle slightly, and you understand too little. The sound of footsteps on the porch saved Wilkes from whatever response he might have made. Mary entered, arms full of supplies, followed by Elizabeth, whose eyes widened at the sight of the bound man and Samuel's blood-stained shirt. "I found these," Mary said, setting down an assortment of items: jerky, dried beans, ammunition for the rifles, a small medical kit, and a bundle of clothing that Samuel recognized as belonging to his sons. Her eyes met his briefly, an unspoken question in them about the appropriateness of taking the preserved garments. Samuel nodded once, pushing away the brief pang of seeing another child holding Joseph's faded blue shirt. "Good. Elizabeth, help her pack these into saddlebags. There should be enough for 2 horses in the stable." Elizabeth moved to comply, working silently and efficiently alongside Mary. Despite her earlier muteness, she seemed to understand exactly what needed to be done, organizing supplies with a practiced hand that spoke of previous experience fending for herself. Samuel turned his attention back to securing Wilkes. Using the last of the rope, he bound the man to one of the heavy support posts that held up the cabin's roof beams. "This won't hold me forever," Wilkes warned as Samuel checked the knots one final time. "Doesn't need to," Samuel replied. "Just long enough." By the time he finished, Samuel's vision was beginning to blur at the edges, his body protesting the continued activity despite the serious wound. He gritted his teeth against the weakness, knowing he couldn't afford to falter now. The girls would need guidance to reach Redemption Creek safely, and there was still the matter of preparing for the journey. Mary approached, the medical kit in her hands. "Let me see your wound. Later. We need to move. You won't make it halfway to town if we don't stop the bleeding," she insisted, a surprising authority in her young voice. "I've dealt with bullet wounds before." Samuel raised an eyebrow at this, but didn't question her. Instead, he reluctantly sat back down, allowing her to lift his blood-soaked shirt to examine the injury. Mary worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with whiskey from Samuel's own supply, drawing a sharp hiss of pain from him, before packing it with clean cloth and binding it tightly with bandages from the medical kit. "The bullet's still in there," she said, her tone clinical despite the gravity of the situation. "It needs to come out proper, but this will keep you from bleeding out on the trail." "Where did you learn to treat wounds like this?" Samuel asked as she tied off the final bandage. A shadow passed across Mary's face. "My father wasn't just a steamboat man. He fought for the Union. Came home with a chest full of lead that never quite healed right. I helped my mother tend him." Samuel nodded, understanding now some of the maturity and competence that seemed at odds with her 14 years. War made adults of children, one way or another, a truth he had witnessed firsthand. "Mr. Porter," Elizabeth spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. "The others are getting restless, and Anna's afraid." "Tell them we're leaving soon," Samuel said, testing his ability to stand without swaying. The bandage had helped. The pain was still there, but more manageable now. "Mary, help me get the horses ready." From his chair, Wilkes watched their preparations with narrowed eyes. "You really think you can outrun Blackwood with 6 kids in tow? He has men all over the territory." "Already told you," Samuel said, checking the loads in both rifles before handing the sharps back to Mary. "We're not running. We're heading to Redemption Creek, to Marshal Sullivan. Sullivan's just one woman. Blackwood owns judges, mayors. Maybe, but from what I hear, she's not a woman who scares easy. And neither am I," Mary added, slinging the rifle over her shoulder with surprising confidence for one so young. The eastern sky was brightening rapidly now, the first golden rays of sunlight spilling over the distant mountains. Samuel knew they needed to move quickly. The journey to Redemption Creek would take most of the day under good conditions, longer with 6 children and his injury slowing them down. "Go fetch the others," he told Mary and Elizabeth. "We leave in 5 minutes." After the girls departed, Samuel turned back to Wilkes, who was watching him with a mixture of hatred and grudging reassessment. "You're making a mistake, Porter," Wilkes said, his voice lower now, almost reasonable. "Blackwood isn't just some small-time criminal. He has connections all the way to Washington, men who benefit from his operations and protect him." "Don't doubt it," Samuel replied, checking his pistol before tucking it into his belt. "Corruption runs deep out here. Then you know this is suicide." Even if you reach Sullivan, what then? You think the law will protect those girls? Best case, they end up in another orphanage or indentured to farmers who will work them half to death. Samuel paused, considering the man's words. There was a kernel of truth there. The territories were hard on orphans, especially girls. But the alternative Wilkes offered was unthinkable. Maybe, Samuel conceded, but they'll have a chance at something better than what you had planned for them. And what about you? You've lived alone all these years for a reason. Now you're saddling yourself with 6 orphans and making an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. For what? It was a question Samuel had asked himself throughout the long night. Why risk his life, his solitude, his safety for these children? The answer came to him not in words but in memories. Hannah's smile as she held newborn Joseph, his older son Samuel Jr., taking his first steps across this very floor, the family they had been before the fever took it all away. Some debts can't be repaid, Samuel said finally. But that doesn't mean a man stops trying. Wilkes scoffed. Poetic. Won't sound so noble when Blackwood's skinning you alive. Maybe not, but I'll still sleep better than you tonight. Samuel moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. Someone will find you eventually. Might be a day or two, though. Hope you're comfortable. Porteur. Wilkes called as Samuel stepped onto the porch. This isn't over. Samuel didn't bother responding. Outside, the girls were emerging from the root cellar, their faces pale in the early morning light, but set with determination. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, held hands as always, while Catherine guided little Anna, whose rag doll was clutched tightly against her chest. Elizabeth and Mary led the group, already moving toward the stable where Samuel had instructed them to prepare the horses. Looking at them, 6 children who had already endured more hardship than anyone their age should, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pain in his side, the danger ahead, the complications of what would come after they reached Redemption Creek if they made it that far. All of it seemed secondary to the immediate need to get these girls to safety. As he followed them to the stable, Samuel cast one last glance at the cabin that had been his solitary refuge for so many years. Whether he would ever return to it was uncertain, but for the first time since burying his family, he found himself looking forward rather than back. A strange sensation, like muscles long and used being stretched after years of atrophy. Inside the stable, Mary and Elizabeth had already saddled his 2 best horses, the sturdy bay gelding he used for cattle work and the smaller pinto mare that had originally been Hannah's. Seeing the girls efficiently checking cinches and bridles, Samuel was again struck by how much they had been forced to learn simply to survive. We'll need to double up, he explained, mentally calculating weight distribution. Mary and Elizabeth with me on the bay. Catherine, you take the twins on the pinto. Anna rides in front of you. The girls nodded, accepting his instructions without question. They had clearly learned to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, another skill born of harsh necessity. What about supplies? Mary asked, gesturing to the saddlebags they had prepared, divided between both horses. Water is the priority. We'll be crossing open country with few reliable sources. Samuel checked the sky, assessing the weather. Clear for now, but there were clouds building to the west that might bring afternoon thunderstorms, a common occurrence in the territory this time of year. As the girls made final preparations, Samuel retrieved a small leather pouch from inside his shirt, a talisman he had carried since his cavalry days. Inside was a lock of Hannah's hair and tiny carved wooden horses he had made for each of his sons. He had kept these close through all the years of solitude, tangible reminders of what he had lost. Now he tucked the pouch securely inside his shirt again, next to the wound Mary had bandaged. Whatever came next, he would carry his family with him, as always. Ready, Mr. Porter? Mary's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Samuel nodded, pushing aside memories to focus on the present danger. Stay close. Follow my lead. If anything happens to me, keep riding northeast. Redemption Creek lies in a valley between 2 mesas. You can't miss it. Nothing's going to happen to you, Mary said firmly, though her eyes betrayed concern as they flickered to his bandaged side. Samuel managed a small smile, the expression feeling foreign on his face after so many years of solitude. Let's hope you're right. With practiced ease despite his injury, Samuel mounted the bay gelding, then helped Mary and Elizabeth climb up behind him. On the pinto, Catherine settled into the saddle with Anna secured in front of her and the twins sharing the space behind. As they rode away from the ranch, leaving behind the only home Samuel had known for the past 6 years, he felt a curious mixture of trepidation and something that might, in different circumstances, have been called hope. Ahead lay danger and uncertainty, but also purpose, something he had believed lost to him forever after the fever took his family. Behind them, the rising sun cast their shadows long across the desert floor, 6 small figures and 1 larger one, moving together toward whatever awaited them in Redemption Creek.